Hey guys, welcome back to another RotMG video, and for today I wanted to talk to you about my thoughts on the things that they were planning to implement in Month of the Mad God. I currently have the links for the devlog and the public testing on RotMG for the RotMG forums. I know that other content creators have already shared their everyone has taken sort of a very divisive stance on the subject. There's one group of people that are really excited for this because usually it's just those who feel like the game has been too skewed towards those who have been playing for a very long time, or those who have access to resources and wherewithal that you normally wouldn't be able to get financially, and things like pets or access to keys, people who spend money on the game. Those of you who watch my streams, you already know what my stance is on pay to win. And there's another group of people that's really upset about this update because they think it's going to shake up the game so much to the point where it just would not be recognizable anymore. And I understand both sides a little bit. I've always been sort of a fence sitter, not fence sitter in the sense that I don't want to take a side because I don't want to piss anyone off, because obviously if you choose to cement yourself on one side of the spectrum versus the other side of the spectrum, whichever side you take in an argument or a debate, it will cause the other party to look at you less favorably. I kind of care about that, but at the same time, I also just always like to look at both sides of the story because I feel like both are always right and both are always wrong. I'm gonna be looking at this as best I can. I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna be doing this on video. There might just be background footage and I'm posting specific screenshots of what I'm reading. So I hope you guys are okay with that. It's not a scripted video. If I ramble a lot, I'll try my best to edit it all out, but I think for the most part, it's just gonna be me talking about what I'm reading. Okay, so first off, let's start off with the devlog. So Vital Combat. I've always wanted to have some change done to Vitality, right? In the video I made about how I would rework Vitality, I talked about 3 different things, where one, I would have it so I believe one of the choices was Tenacity, in a sense crowd control reduction, like the more Vitality you have, the less time debuffs affect you. Another one was for Vitality to drastically increase out of combat, and I think that's what Deca was going for with the Vital Combat system, where basically what they're doing is they're making it so that Vitality and Wisdom have a much higher multiplier when it comes to regenerating your HP and MP. In exchange, these regeneration bonuses only activate to their fullest effect when you are out of combat. After reading about it a little more, because usually when you're in combat, it's not only if you're receiving damage, but when you're dealing damage, but given the nature of Realm being a bullet hell game, from what I can see here, when they say in combat, they don't mean you dishing out damage, they mean you receiving damage. In other words, this system is designed to encourage you and incentivize you to dodge as much as possible. It kind of removes a little bit of the necessity for you to have a huge party, get a bunch of M-Seals, a bunch of Puries, and a Divine Pet and face tank everything. In a general sense, I like that part. But what I don't understand is Oryx 3, and by extension the other 4 bosses, are living proof that even with all of the necessary tools you need to face tank everything and be practically invincible and steamroll the game, it's almost the same thing as you fighting a boss all on your own, and there are just other players around who are also fighting a 1v1v1v1v1. Because even with M-Seals, even with Puries, even with all these extra tools you have, even with a giant party, that's not going to stop you from dying. I mentioned it before in my How to Stop Dying video that no matter how many tools you have, this is a bullet hell game. In other words, you have to dodge, you have no choice. There's just certain instances where you cannot tank everything. That's not the point of the game. You're not supposed to tank bullets. So the way they're reworking Vitality is to make it so that you get out of the in-combat status faster. That makes a lot of sense because Vitality, if we look at the general definition, people attribute it to stamina or endurance. And naturally, those who have much higher stamina can catch their breath a lot quicker and get back into the fight as quickly as possible. And I've also had the same sentiment towards pets where I feel like it's just become too neurotic in terms of people trying to go for the heal, magic heal, electric pet. And having a divine pet myself, not for as long as some other people, I see definitely that it makes things much less threatening for you. Like I said, even if you have all the necessary tools needed to survive, you can still get one shot, you can still get hit by a shotgun or something and go from 100 to 0. Regeneration doesn't matter if you get instantly destroyed. But if you don't, and that's 90% of the time, you can get right back into the fight. Having a pet is extremely convenient. Now, what they were doing was that they were trying to make it so that pets are being kept as a valuable gameplay mechanic without trivializing too much of the game's content. The thing is, while they said that that was their goal, all they did was make pets weaker. They made no changes to the pet system. Bluntly speaking, the pet system is terrible. And I proposed some different ideas on Reddit about how, maybe what we could do is rework the pets to have the individual families, aquatic, avian, spooky, what have you, serve a different purpose. Like I was suggesting, maybe Automaton be a very defensive pet family that can help boost your resistance to damage or something like that. Or avians can help you boost your speed by moving around faster. Penguins can slow you down, or not slow you down, but slow the enemy down. Things like that. That way, pets are not just a babysitter keeping your HP and MP as high as possible. In certain games, they have summons, like, little dragons or fairies that you can carry with you that augment your gameplay experience. And I think if they really spent a lot of time going into the heart of the situation or the root of the problem and addressing the fact that pets are just not a very interactive experience, I think that could be a more favorable change than simply nerfing the magic heal and heal. I think it's fine for them to do this right now because it's just a placeholder. Naturally, I know that they don't have as much manpower as the likes of AAA companies, and so I'll give them the time that they need to work through this. But I think there's a much bigger issue that they're not really addressing, and as of right now, all they're trying to do is make it so that you don't really need large Discord parties, and you don't need to worry about having a really strong pet. So it works in favor for those who are having a hard time really enjoying the game without being part of a Discord server. And I also feel the same way because I don't agree with how you're always given the option to do dungeons just with you and a couple friends or to join a Discord server. However, 90% of the time, players would much rather choose something that is efficient rather than something that's fun. If you had to choose one or the other, of course, choose for the option that is both efficient and fun. But most of the time, gamers as a whole, we like to find the easiest way to do something or the fastest way to do something. That's just how it is. And Discord servers have made it sort of imperative for players to use only that as a resource to access certain dungeons. Even if someone pops a Lost Halls in a nexus of 200 people or a fungal cavern, no one goes into them because everyone else, oh, if I ever need to go into a fungal or if I ever need to go Lost Halls, I'll just go through a Discord. That problem does exist. I am a raid leader myself for Oryx 3. In all honesty, you cannot do Oryx Sanctuary unless you're in a Discord server, because the sheer amount of support that you need to tackle on these dungeons is just impossible to do unless you have a party of 6 or 10 people. That being said, I'm a huge fan of Realm's 24/7 raiding style. Most other MMORPGs, they limit their party size down to like 6 or 10 or 5 or something like that. That way it forces the players to be very selective and very specific with what they want because they have to manage their, capacity and to make sure that they're getting all the right essential buffs and classes that they need in a small party size. On the flip side though, the fact that anyone can go into a party dungeon, anyone can go into a boss battle, and there can be a capacity of 65 to 85 people, I enjoy that, kind of that creative chaos that you have with a whole bunch of players running around. It makes everything public, sort of like Pokemon Go. I hate that game, but whenever I see people gathering around getting ready to capture a rare Mewtwo or something, it's cool because it allows players to gather together. Even if you never met the person, you could still participate and cooperate together to take out a boss. If you watch my streams, you sort of know my opinion on the whole raid leading thing, and I'm a raid leader myself, but I still hold the belief that you should be able to play the game as if you were entirely on your own. There are too many players who have not only become dependent on these raid discords and such, but they've also just become too spoiled in a sense. As I've mentioned before, the issue right now with steamrolling is that it's become far too easy for players, especially those who are inexperienced and those who do not have the right means and the right knowledge and the right equipment to take on these dungeons. There are players who can come into a Lost Halls or whatever, 0-8, who can come into a Lost Halls or whatever and get through the dungeon perfectly fine. From a design perspective, that's a horrible thing. A brand new player should not be able to go into a late or endgame dungeon and be able to complete it. Because of this, there's a large majority of players who simply are in a much higher inflated status since they're for all intents and purposes being carried by discords. Let me give you an example to a different game, League of Legends. I don't know how many of my viewers play League, but I can raid discords to be sort of group boosting. A lot of these players are boosted in that they're in much higher or they're taking on much harder dungeons than they are able to do with their knowledge, with their experience and their skill set, and also their, mechanics and their equipment, that it creates a very unnatural sense of progression that can be heavily skewed in one way or another. Now the point for this change is to make it so that you no longer have to do that, which is good because I do think that Discord servers are a great blessing to the community. It's been the first time, let me rephrase that. This is the first time I've ever seen a game where the community bands together to create public Discord servers that grant catered runs towards specific dungeons. It saves me the trouble of having to find a random sentry and organize a group of 10-20 people. It allows for accessibility for players who don't have, let's say, the connections or a lot of friends or people that they know in the game to get a hold of these dungeons, because even if you're a very good player, you don't just randomly go into a Godlands, search for a lost sentry, and say, okay, lost halls, now guys come over, because the portal only lasts 30 seconds. It takes a lot of time to set these things up, and I think it's a great idea to have these Discord servers. Unfortunately, the alternative to a Discord server is just so inefficient, so impractical, and so time-consuming that no one in their right mind would want to do it, which is why most people default to Discord servers, and therefore there's just a lot of hassles to being in a Discord run. For example, the rules that you have to follow. Some people would much rather just play quietly as if they were on their own, especially those who have done the dungeon several times over and can go through a Discord run without necessarily needing a raid leader to guide them through. And there's just a whole bunch of other things, like now if you want to go for, let's say, a Shatters run or a Fungal Cavern, sometimes there might be an hour or 2 or 3 where no one's leading, and then therefore you have to wait because obviously no one wants to go and search for one on their own. Okay, I kind of went too long on a single topic, but I think Vital Combat is a really big deal because it's been something that people have been talking about for a long time, and I'm sort of ambivalent towards the changes. I think it's a good step in the right direction, but I believe that Deca needs to do a lot more testing, and I really hope that if they implement it now as sort of a pilot test, then what they should do is heavily scrutinize the next few months and how it impacts the dynamic of players versus the enemies that they fight, because this is going to change so many things. For example, one problem I can think of right off the top of my head is that how are you going to be able to do bosses like Chancellor Dama, who sickens and armor breaks and silences you 24/7, especially with the lack of pet sustain, because there are certain aspects of bosses where the only thing keeping most players alive is their pet and just AoE healing and such. But the changes they're making to in combat is that you have to essentially dodge as much as possible, but there are some dungeons where it's physically impossible to dodge everything because your hitbox is too big, like Dama and Marble Colossus. So I think what they need to do is pay very close attention to how Vital Combat is shifting the balance and difficulty of certain dungeons, because some dungeons do not change at all. Like Shatters, I don't think anything's gonna change with Shatters. I don't think anything's gonna change with the Nest because you can theoretically dodge everything. Maybe not quite so much in certain phases of the Killer Bee Queen, but usually you don't care about that. Fungal Cavern maybe, but there are certain dungeons like Lost Halls and Auric Sanctuary where it is physically impossible to dodge everything, and therefore that's why we rely on things like Priests to heal us, Paladins to regenerate, Marble Seal, or our own pets. And what they're doing here is shaking up our whole aspect of survivability to be focused purely on dodging. But they didn't consider all of the dungeons and all of the boss battles that were designed with that in accommodation. That's sort of like the same thing as building a house with a wood foundation, right? And then you decide to make an interior change that would only work if you had a stone foundation. Deca needs to remember that any major system change they do, and this is a system change, will have a rippling effect. And they have to make sure that all of the different impacts that it has throughout the entire game's mechanics, the core design, as well as the content, does not change to the point where it's just completely unplayable. We're getting a little long here, so I'm going to try to speed it up a little bit. I think I've kind of got my point through when it comes to Vital Combat. I just hope that they're very careful with how they do this, because if they're trying to just straight up nerf Priests and Paladins or all of our forms of sustainability, they have to make sure that we can still do these dungeons without breaking our back, because in that case, that doesn't really change the fact that people are still going to need a whole bunch of others, because if you nerf things like a Priest or a Paladin, that means most of the time players will circumvent that by just getting more Priests and Paladins to make up for the lack of, I guess, efficiency and output that each individual one has. Now, in terms of status rebalances, I'm very happy about it, because Berserk and Damaging is frankly too overpowered. The fact that you can stack so many different things, Curse, Augmer, Expose, Berserk, Damaging, even things like Attack Effusions and Dex Effusions, it can skyrocket a player's DPS to unnatural amounts, which, like I said, has an even more profound effect with the more players you have. That's why we have this whole steamrolling meta, because when you have like 60 warriors that are empowered by Paladin and a Berserk and a Curse, Augmer, Expose, then you would have the same strength as, let's say, 200 individual players attacking a target versus them combined. So I'm glad that they're nerfing it to go from 1.5 times bonus to 1.25, and I also am pretty happy with the fact that they're making defense a bit more of an important stat, because as of right now, we've been kind of over-focused on health, since there's a lot of attacks that armor break, a lot of attacks that do true damage, and most of the time, because we're getting into a higher level of damage threshold, before, most attacks only did about 100 damage, 200 damage, maybe 300 damage at most. But Oryx 3, for example, has so many attacks that regularly do 300, 400 damage, to the point where 40 defense, 50 defense makes no difference at all, and you would much rather have just more HP. That being said, they're nerfing armor to go from 2 times defense to 1.5 times defense. Once again, they're reducing the player's survivability with the goal in mind for you to dodge as many things as possible. I think they're also rebalancing enemy health. We're gonna have to figure out how that goes along, because I don't know if adaptive scaling is necessarily beneficial towards all aspects of the game and all content. Status effect rebalancing, from what I'm understanding, is that they're trying to give you a cooldown so that you don't get chain paralyzed, chain stun, chain stasis, things like that. The changes in particular that we are getting are paralyzed and petrified. In other words, every time we get paralyzed or every time we get petrified, we are immune to receiving further instances of crowd control until that is over, plus maybe a little bit more time. I like that, but what they're also doing is adding a cooldown for certain debuffs like a slow, daze, paralyzed, stun, and stasis towards bosses or all enemies. I think that's decent because it prevents you from being able to do a whole bunch of cheese tactics like chain paralyzing or chain stunning, chain dazing or slowing, but I just really hope that, once again, we're already losing a lot of our survivability and damage output, right? So naturally speaking, bosses would take a lot longer and they're also more dangerous. Normally, we would then rely on crowd control to lessen or mitigate their threat potential, but now they're imposing a cooldown on it so that we cannot permanently chain. Mind you, I think certain bosses it doesn't really make a difference because a lot of bosses are immune to these kinds of status effects, and they also have periods where you can only damage them for a couple seconds anyway, so the cooldown doesn't make much of a difference. Actually, yeah, now that I think about it, I don't think any boss besides maybe O2 and Tombs where having a cooldown is a negative catalyst for us in terms of taking down certain bosses, so I think we're all okay with that. Class changes. The seal, in particular, it says increasing max HP no longer heals you directly. What people don't know, I'm sure a lot of people don't know, is that when you receive your maximum health bonus, not only does it give you X amount of HP, like let's say it increases your HP by 120, it also heals you for 120. Now what they're doing instead is that it raises your max HP by a certain amount, but it maintains what your current HP was before you even cast the seal. I don't think it's that big a deal, especially for classes like Paladin who rely on that quote-unquote pseudo heal to keep them alive, because they are receiving a lot more benefits to their attack stat, their dex stat, vitality in anticipation for the vital combat. So I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Now Mystic on the other hand is receiving a huge DPS boost, which I'm looking forward to, but I think it's just to accommodate for the fact that Paladin, Mystic, and Warrior have all been nerfed due to Curse, Damaging, and Berserk no longer give you as big of a steroid as you used to before. Priests though, I'm very unhappy about these changes. I'm sure a lot of people are pretty unified when it comes to the priest changes in particular, because the whole point of a priest is to be the support class. You don't really play a priest for yourself, you play for other people. While I believe that priests being able to spam heal on a lot of targets over and over again does, once again, trivialize your need to survive and dodge a bunch of attacks, I think the way they're making changes towards the tomes is something I'm not a big fan of. For example, the main case for this is Tome of Purification and Book of Geb. The only reason why you would use Purification over any other tome is not for the convenience of yourself. You take a Purification tome for the sake of the party. That's why Discords request priests to bring a Puri tome and not a prot or anything else, because you need to support your party, not just yourself. A proposal that someone made on Reddit a few weeks ago was the change to make it so that Puri, instead of healing you, will only purify, as in it only cleanses status effects. And I think that's a really awesome change, because I don't think that purification should be done on yourself, because then at that point, why would you ever play a priest? You would just be a weaker necromancer or a weaker wizard, just with the ability to keep yourself alive a little bit longer, but if you don't contribute anything, then why would you ever want to play that class? So instead, we can make it so that the Tome of Purification, or Puri, just does not heal you at all, and in exchange, all it does is just remove all status effects on the party, which means you have to decide if you want to choose between regeneration or remove yourself from any immediate danger whenever you get hit by crowd control. The thing is, as a game designer, nerfing aspects of a video game is much more delicate and a much more, I guess, walk on eggshell situation than you were to buff a character. Adding something generally does not impose any sort of problems towards whatever is currently existing, unless of course whatever you add ends up overshadowing or ends up rendering other things obsolete. Let's say, for example, that you are building a computer and you decide, hey, I want to add another GPU, or I want to add another fan, or I want to add another card of RAM or cartridge. I don't know, actually, what are they called? RAM, whatever. I want to add something more to a computer. That doesn't really impact the rest of the computer. They just function along as normal. But if you decide to take out something, such as removing your processor, removing your fan, removing literally any important part of a computer, the entire thing can break. That's why you have to walk on a very fine line whenever you're nerfing things, because it's not only just, oh, the thing is weaker. You could strip the entire identity of that specific content, even with one small minute change, because that one minute item or aspect could be the only thing that is keeping together an entire foundation. You have to be very specific when you're balancing in particular, because a lot of game designers, I feel like, and developers think, oh, it's so easy. If there's a class that's super overpowered, then just make them weaker. But the way you make them weaker is what I think a lot of developers don't necessarily appreciate that much, because, like I said, the way they're trying to change the tomes, especially with Tome of Purification and Book of Geb, is that not only are they making those tomes weaker, but by extension, through a ripple effect, they are making the entire class practically useless. Very rarely do you ever see a person playing a priest as a solo class, and most of the time if they do it, it's for a challenge or a PPE or whatnot, but usually, no one's idea of a class to play like the one they want to go to would be a priest. It's a class specifically meant to be contributing towards a collective and not an individual. As for what they're doing with Exaltation, Exaltation, like I said before, they are adding something. Now, some people might complain that Exaltation is considered power creep. It's making characters even stronger than ever before. Yes, that is true, but we are also reaching a point where the content that is being introduced is becoming much, much more dangerous, and therefore we need the right equipment, the right means and wherewithal to take on that content to eventually make it easier than when it first came out. I know that a lot of people feel like, oh, 03 came out, it was hard for like 2 seconds, and then after Discord servers figured it out, he's super easy. That's kind of the point of a PvE game. Eventually you want it to become easy because that's the reward for putting in the time and effort to learn that dungeon. It's the same as, let's say, I don't know, learning mathematics. At first, when you don't understand anything about calculus, it's super hard and you gotta put a lot of time and effort, you gotta grind it out. But once you figure out how to solve all the problems and once you figure out the formulas and the basic mechanics of calculus, it becomes super easy. That's just life. You know, that's just how it is. Even for a bunch of other games as well. That's the main reason why people enjoy competitive games, player versus player, because there's no such thing as you learning something and it becomes easy, because the enemy team or the enemy player can also learn more about you. So as you learn more about the other player learns more about you, and it turns into sort of like a kind of crab mentality where you keep pulling on top of each other until like eventually one of you guys gives up. But in a PvE game, that is natural. That is the whole essence of a player versus environment game. There's something that you do not know, therefore it is difficult. Once you study and learn that thing, it no longer becomes difficult. But I think that's sort of what my thoughts are with the new changes. I just think that Deca should not be so careless with how they introduce all these changes, because they're not doing just like a small, oh, we're just gonna make things a little bit weaker or something stronger. They are completely overhauling Realm of the Mad Gods combat gameplay as we know it. I don't want to discredit them and think like they didn't give this any consideration. It seems like they're trying to really figure out the best way to go about this, but just as a game designer myself, I think that they need to handle this situation a little bit more delicately than they are right now. It's not just what happens on the surface level, it's a ripple effect. There could be a whole string of events or a whole chain of events that happen after this that they're not necessarily foreseeing. And that kind of prudence is super important for a video game, especially when what you're doing changes the essential experience of the game as players know it. Some players might be welcome to it, but other players won't, because we as players value familiarity. That's also something that League of Legends has been struggling with a lot, and I've spent a lot of time researching and studying about it. They continuously change the game so much to the point that players just cannot find a comfortable medium or just settle down and enjoy the game and truly understand it, and it keeps them confused. Some players enjoy that because it means that the game never becomes monotonous or samey. But the point of a good video game is to allow for players enough time to adapt to a new circumstance before changing it, and in certain instances, if the change is too great, players cannot adapt to it because it's just way too overwhelming. Like, if your body is injured, it adapts to make you more resilient in that specific spot. But if the damage is too severe, you're just gonna die. There's nothing you can do about it, right? You want to pace yourself. And I think if these changes were instated one at a time over the course of a year or two, I think that would actually be a little bit smarter than if they were to just hammer it all out at once. I can understand why they wanted to do it all at once, but I just hope that they think this through, execute it improperly, and if executed carelessly, this can be catastrophic to the player base. Myself included. I don't know, I'm pretty excited about Month of the Mad God, but if these changes are not implemented properly, and if they are not monitored and I guess maintained correctly, then I might just quit. I don't want to make a decision yet, I don't want to jump to conclusions. I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm also sort of apprehensive about what they're doing. Usually, if changes as grand and as impactful as this happens, developers should alert the players long before they decide to implement it and have the players slowly acclimatize to the potential new environment that's coming. But when they released all this information, they're practically only giving us like 2 weeks or 3 weeks to figure out, okay, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? How do we prepare for it? And I think it's starting to really stress out players who are like, what is going to happen? Because like they don't know exactly how to handle this situation. To some people, it might be overwhelming and they'll just quit. Okay, so after seeing I'm seeing this right now and it's almost reaching 40 minutes. I hope I can at least bring it down to under half an hour, but those are my thoughts on the game. I know I kind of rambled on a lot, but you guys know me at this point. I like to go very deep into certain things, and I'm, again, cautiously optimistic, but I just hope that they think this through and make sure that every potential ramification or every potential consequence of this is handled or at least considered. They have to be extremely prudent about this. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section below, and if you would like to see more discussion videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Apart from that, if you enjoyed, a rating would be much appreciated, and share with your friends if they're all very confused or very worried about this, and I don't blame them. I'm also very nervous about this too. I think that's going to be it though. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next video. Take care.